Welcome, everyone. The first thing I want to let you know is there's a little bit of a typo here. I've actually got six that I'm going to talk to you about today, so I'm going to jump right in. But first, I've met most of you in the room, either in person at one of these Atlassian events or possibly by email or over the phone. So many of you know what I do. I answer a lot of questions about a lot of our products. But even beyond that, it's very rare that I kind of accept a yes or no answer about whether or not something is possible or whether or not our products have a certain feature. So a lot of the Atlassians in the room know me, especially the Sydney folks, because I bug tech support and the development teams all the time. I always want to know the details about how something works, what the underlying data model is, so I know whether or not something is possible, and also if there are multiple ways of doing it, I want to know how. So the talk today is just kind of a collection of a few tips and tricks that I've learned from those conversations. I'm going to talk about some things that will apply to both JIRA and Confluence, and some things that are both specific to Confluence and specific to JIRA. But first, just a note, I created a resources page for this talk. I'm using snippets of code from other people and links to documentation and knowledge base articles. Everything that I've used to create all of the screenshots, all of the snippets of JavaScript and HTML, they're all on this page. So you don't have to worry about copying anything down, and you can find them there. So first, a couple of examples. And the very first thing that I want to talk about is JavaScript. So JavaScript is really useful in both JIRA and Confluence to do all kinds of small tweaks to make things easier in the lives of your users. So a great example here is in Confluence. I don't know if you noticed, but every time you attach an image to a page by default, that border checkbox is checked. So every image that you attach to a page has that black border line. That maybe annoy you as a page viewer. It might annoy your users if they don't want a border or don't use it very often. Definitely annoys me sometimes. So there's a little bit of JavaScript that you as the administrator can insert and just have that turned off by default. Another example here in JIRA, if you file a support ticket on support.atlassian.com in the past several years, you've probably seen this. There's a time zone field here, and rather than giving you a list of time zones to pick from, what we've done is in the text for that select list, we've actually just inserted JavaScript, and it goes to your browser, figures out what time zone you're in, and sets that for you. So those are a couple examples of how you can just kind of do small tweaks that might make things simpler for the JIRA and Confluence users. But I also want to mention, you've probably heard some other things about Speakeasy extensions and how those can be JavaScript. So the examples that I just showed are things that you as the administrator apply across your entire instance, and they're global for everyone. Whereas the Speakeasy extensions, yes, they can be JavaScript. They don't have to be. They're also things that your users can turn on and off for themselves. So they're definitely different things. If you're interested in learning more, there were a couple other talks that you'll find useful. Corey had a talk earlier today. He uses JavaScript to make some things appear differently on Confluence pages. And then Dawn spoke this morning about Speakeasy. I'm sure many of you were able to make it. But if you weren't, the slides and the videos will be up within, I think, a couple of weeks on summit.atlassian.com. So that's where you can learn more about those as well. Number two, I've actually heard in a lot of talks people talk about using the announcement banner. It's really useful to kind of get messages across to your users. So definitely use it if you aren't using it already. It's great for all kinds of like time-sensitive things that you want to draw attention to. We use this on confluence.atlassian.com all the time to let you know about planned downtime. So things like Confluence will be upgraded or JIRA is going to be down. It's a great way to kind of get that message across to your users. But I've seen a couple of other creative ways. So the first thing that I've seen people use this is actually to just kind of highlight little tips and tricks to your users. So how many people in this room use both JIRA and Confluence? A lot. Awesome. A lot. So I've seen somebody actually put in the announcement banner on JIRA to let their users know that they can use Confluence wiki markup in JIRA fields, and that will render in rich text. It's a great way to kind of get that tip across to your users. You can also use it for kind of, office-specific things that might be happening later that day, like we have around Atlassian. But I have an even better trick for this. So now how many of you use a test instance and jump back and forth between different users because you either want to see how someone sees the system differently than you, or you want to check based on permissions whether or not they can see some restricted content? Awesome. Okay, at least a few of you. I'm going to save you some time. There's a bit of HTML that you can put into the announcement banner, and it gives you these hyperlinks, and those are usernames here. What that does, let's say I'm viewing a JIRA issue, and this issue has a couple of comments. I go to the top of the page, I click a link, all of a sudden I'm logged in as another user on that same issue. So I don't have to log out, log back in, type the credentials, and then copy and paste the issue key or the link to the page that I was viewing before. Refreshes the page once, really handy. It saves me tons of time because I do that all the time. But just a couple of caveats. So the passwords are in plain text on the HTML on the page, so only use this for testing. And also name your users as personas. I know that I usually have someone named manager, someone named CEO, and someone named end user or something like that in my instance. So it's a really good way to just kind of jump back and forth, make sure people are viewing the right content that you want them to see. So the takeaway from those two sections, you can have a lot more powerful and a much quicker experience using both JavaScript and HTML. Now I'm going to talk about Confluence for just a minute here. So I know that I saw a lot of Confluence users here. So the first thing that I want to talk about is getting people looking at the right stuff. So a lot of people in this room have been using Confluence for many years, and there tends to be this problem of too much content on the wiki, or people aren't naming things with the right thing. So people are getting too many results in search, they can't find exactly what they're looking for, or maybe they don't find the newest content. We've been solving this problem, and you may have seen some examples in other talks. So Confluence comes with a welcome message, just kind of welcome to Confluence, hello. You can customize that a little bit. You can even put in links to point people toward other pages so that they kind of know where to navigate. But here's a recent screenshot from earlier in the week. This is on our internal instance at Atlassian. And what you'll notice here is this is using the content by label macro so that the dashboard always has dynamic content. What that means is that anyone who's publishing a page or a blog that they want to show up on the dashboard, they know that they can use a very specific label and it will show up. What it also means is that everyone knows where to go for important, exciting, new information. The next thing I want to talk about is default content for spaces. So you can do different default content for regular spaces as opposed to personal spaces. And I know some of you may have more shy users who don't customize their personal space. So a great thing to do there is just have everyone's personal space default with a blog post macro. So this is a screenshot of my own personal space, just has a recent running of my blogs, both in my personal space and in my team space. So that's kind of a way to make sure that even if someone never actually customizes their own personal space, it'll still have some dynamic content that's relevant to them if someone else finds their page on Confluence. But on the other side of things, if you were in the JIRA State of Union this morning, we talked about kind of newbie users and then power users. So for your power users, and I'm actually really excited to tell you about this because I thought that this was pretty well known, but I told a Confluence developer about this yesterday and she didn't know that you can skin your personal space with CSS, and I thought that was pretty funny. But as I mentioned, your personal space, relatively boring if you don't do much to it, but you can kind of take it to the next level by, again, giving personal spaces some default content for your users. But one of the things that we did recently, we actually ran an internal contest for who could put the coolest CSS on their personal space. Here's an example of one. This is someone's personal space in Confluence. It's live right now. It's just kind of a really good way to get users excited about doing something in Confluence, something as boring as your personal space. You can take it to all kinds of new levels. And the example for this and for the other examples are on that resources page I talked about. How many of you remember when Wikipedia had that header across the top with the picture asking for donations? So also as part of this contest, Somebody took that header and put our founders, which I thought was pretty funny. It was a pretty clever use. So if you haven't done this before, or if you haven't explored the feature, it's really easy to navigate to. Go to your personal space administration and just click Style Sheet. There are a bunch of examples that I've linked to from that resources page. So you can just paste them in there, save it, check it out, play around, tweak. It's a fun way to kind of get excited about using Confluence. So the takeaway here, using things like label macros, using things like space content, you can help get eyes on new, exciting, dynamic, and important content in Confluence. And next I want to talk about JIRA. So how many people were in the JIRA State of the Union? A lot. Okay, so you've probably already heard this, but I'm going to say it one more time. Ken mentioned very briefly, so in JIRA 4.2, we introduced the dialogues, and what that is kind of a light box that pops up when you do a transition. So Ken mentioned that he created a transition that's just a loop back to where it was before. But what it is something like time estimates. If you know that you create issues, and then you're going to have to give a time estimate, a few days later or a few months whenever you pick it up and start doing work. You don't want to see the whole edit screen because that can be overwhelming sometimes. So make a little transition, call it estimate, have it loop back, straight back to open, and just put the time tracking fields on that. So your users don't have to see the full edit screen. They don't have to deal with a page refresh. They don't have to wait. And it takes you back to the same step. It's just kind of a useful way to get people to edit a subset of fields that they're going to edit pretty often. If you want to learn how to set it up, Ken's actually talking about it. I don't think he's next. I think he's after the next talk, and I think he's across the hall. So the takeaway there, create a custom workflow transition, make it a loop for a subset of fields that you edit often. Perfect timing. I know we've got 1 minute left, so just in sum, using things like JavaScript and HTML. There are tons of ways using labels and space content to get eyes on the good stuff in Confluence, and using loop transitions to edit a subset of fields in JIRA. Like I said, these are ones that I've learned just kind of through hallway conversations and IM chats with people internally, with people externally. I know there are probably tons more. I can't go to the decompression chamber right now, but I will be there a little bit later this afternoon. But tweet them. If you have a login on confluence.atlassian.com, comment on that resources page. Share them, because I know that all of you know tiny little tricks, tweaks, hacks, that kind of thing that'll save you some time as an administrator. That's why we have Atlassian Summit. That's why we have events like this, so that you can share tips with us, we can share them with you, and you can share them with each other. So thank you.